Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 92nd Street Y. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Sorry for the slight delay to the start time. I'm Lucas Whitman, the Executive Director of the Unterberg Center for Poetry and Literature here at the Y, and we're so pleased to have you all with us tonight to celebrate the writing of the inimitable Anthony Bourdain. He was an iconic chef, an intrepid TV explorer. Millions got to know him that way. They saw the world through his eyes, through his exploration of food and culture and community. But above all, and firstly, he was an author, a writer who came to define how we think about food, about place, about people. And so tonight we're honored to join with his publisher Echo and with his friend and agent Kimberly Witherspoon and his many friends to gather on this stage to celebrate this new collection of his writing, the Anthony Bourdain Reader, which was published today. This new collection is a marvel that shows his range, his humanity, and reminds us again about why we celebrate him as a writer. So to hear his words read aloud by friends and to hear them share some thoughts on his writing. Hosting the evening and the conversation will be Laurie Woolever. Laurie was his assistant for nearly a decade and has co-authored 2 books with Bourdain, Appetites, a cookbook, and World Travel, an irreverent guide. She is also the author of Bourdain, the definitive oral biography, and her own memoir, Care and Feeding, which came out earlier this year. Before we begin, I want to thank the Greenwood family for endowing tonight's program in memory of their parents, James and Alice Greenwood, whose own endowment gift named the Poetry Center after Bella Unterberg, one of the visionary founders of the 92nd Street Y. We thank them for their longtime support and enthusiasm for what we do here. I also want to just do 2 quick housekeeping notes. First, if you bought a ticket to tonight's show, you get a bundled book. So please make sure you collect it. Show your ticket to Postman's, which is selling books outside, to collect your book. They will also have signed books for sale of all of tonight's speakers. So I encourage you to get those as well. And finally, I just want to highlight a few upcoming events we have here. On November 6th, Salman Rushdie will be here, launching his new book of fiction in conversation with the German writer Daniel Kellman. On November 10th, Patrick Radden Keefe will be back on this stage, returning for a conversation with the human rights lawyer and historian Philippe Sands. And then on the 24th, the poet Paul Muldoon, longtime poetry editor of The New Yorker, will be jamming with his band Rogue Elephant. They will be joined by folk legend Richard Thompson, poet Marie Howe, and journalist Molly Jong-Fast for a truly original night of rock and poetics. I hope you'll all come back and join us for that. But without further ado, welcome to Anthony Bourdain Night here at the 92nd Street Y. Please welcome Laurie Woolever to the stage.
Hi, good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. Really excited to be here on the publication date of the Anthony Bourdain Reader, New Classic and Rediscovered Writing. I want to bring out all of the people that are here tonight to read from Tony's work and talk about him as a writer and as a friend and colleague. I'm going to start with Kim Witherspoon, who is the editor of the book that we're here to celebrate tonight. Kim Witherspoon was Anthony Bourdain's literary agent and friend for over 20 years, shepherding his book projects, his television career, and his successful side hustle as a public speaker. Kim is a gifted writer and editor, and she is the one who conceived of and who put together the Anthony Bourdain Reader, the book we're here to celebrate tonight. From my vantage point, there was no one who Tony trusted more. Please welcome Kim Witherspoon. Next, I'd like to bring out Karen Rinaldi. Karen Rinaldi is a novelist and nonfiction writer and has been a publishing executive for over 3 decades. She's currently Senior Vice President and Executive Editor at HarperCollins, where she founded the Harper Wave imprint in 2012. Karen was previously publisher and general manager at Rodale, and before that, she was managing editor and publisher at Bloomsbury US, where her great editorial instinct led her to commission from Tony Bourdain the book that would become Kitchen Confidential. Please welcome Karen Rinaldi. Our next guest is Patrick Radden Keefe. He is the author of the New York Times bestsellers Rogues Empire of Pain, and Say Nothing, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction and the Orwell Prize for Political Writing, and was adapted for a television series. He is a staff writer at The New Yorker, where in 2017 he published a profile called Anthony Bourdain's Movable Feast. Please welcome Patrick Radden Keefe. Our next guest is Ruth Reichl. Ruth Reichl has written 4 cookbooks, 5 memoirs, and 2 novels. She was the dining critic for the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times. And from 1999 to 2009, she was the editor-in-chief at Gourmet magazine. In 2010, Tony was so enamored of Ruth's poetic Twitter work, which he called deranged in a really cool way, like she's living inside of an MFK Fisher novel, that he created a satellite radio segment called The Tao of Ruth. Please welcome Ruth Reichl. And next we have Gabrielle Hamilton. Gabrielle Hamilton is the James Beard Award-winning chef and owner of Prune Restaurant in downtown Manhattan, and the author of 3 books: Prune, a New York Times best-selling cookbook based on the restaurant; Next of Kin, her just-published memoir of family, death, and life, which Publishers Weekly called layered, moving, and funny, and a must-read; and the New York Times best-selling Blood, Bones, and Butter, which her friend and colleague Tony Bourdain himself called simply the best memoir by a chef ever, ever. Please welcome Gabrielle Hamilton. So the first part of the evening, we're going to have some readings from our honored guests here. And the first person to read is Kim Witherspoon. So please come on up, Kim.
Hi, everybody. Is this working? Yeah. I thought we would start off with the piece that really accelerated Tony's writing career and kind of put him on the map as a writer. It's called Don't Eat Before Reading This, and it was originally published in The New Yorker in 1999. Good food, good eating is all about blood and organs, cruelty and decay. It's about sodium-loaded pork fat, stinky triple cream cheeses, the tender thymus glands and distended livers of young animals. It's about danger, risking the dark bacterial forces of beef, chicken, cheese, and shellfish. Your first 207 Wellfleet oysters may transport you to a state of rapture, but your 208th may send you to bed with sweats, chills, and vomits. Gastronomy is the science of pain. Professional cooks belong to a secret society whose ancient rituals derive from the principles of stoicism in the face of humiliation, injury, fatigue, and the threat of illness. The members of a tight, well-greased kitchen staff are a lot like a submarine crew, confined for most of their waking hours in hot, airless spaces and ruled by despotic leaders. They often acquire the characteristics of the poor saps who were press-ganged into the royal navies of Napoleonic times: superstition, a contempt for outsiders, and a loyalty to no flag but their own. A good deal has changed since Orwell's memoir of the months he spent as a dishwasher in Down and Out in Paris and London. Gas ranges and exhaust fans have gone a long way toward increasing the lifespan of the working culinarian. Nowadays, most aspiring cooks come into the business because they want to. They've chosen this life, studied for it. Today's top chefs are like star athletes. They bounce from kitchen to kitchen, free agents in search of more money, more acclaim. Say it's a quiet Monday night, and you've just checked your coat in that swanky Art Deco update in the Flatiron District, and you're looking to tuck into a thick slab of pepper-crested yellowfin tuna or a 20-ounce cut of certified Black Angus beef well done. What are you in for? The fish specialty is reasonably priced, and the place got 2 stars in the Times. Why not go for it? If you like 4-day-old fish, be my guest. Here's how things usually work. The chef orders his seafood for the weekend on Thursday night. It arrives on Friday morning. He's hoping to sell the bulk of it on Friday and Saturday nights when he knows that the restaurant will be busy, and he'd like to run out of the last few orders by Sunday evening. Many fish purveyors don't deliver on Saturday, so the chances are that the Monday night tuna you want has been kicking around in the kitchen since Friday morning under God knows what conditions. When a kitchen is in full swing, proper refrigeration is almost non-existent, what with the many openings of the refrigerator door as the cooks rummage frantically during the rush, mingling your tuna with the chicken, the lamb, or the beef. Generally speaking, the good stuff comes in on Tuesday. The seafood is fresh, the supply of prepared food is new, and the chef presumably is relaxed after his day off. Most chefs don't work on Monday. Chefs prefer to cook for weekday customers rather than for weekenders, and they like to start the new week with their most creative dishes. In New York, locals dine during the week. Weekends are considered amateur nights for tourists, rubes, and the well-done ordering pre-theater hordes. The fish may be just as fresh on Friday, but it's on Tuesday that you've got the goodwill of the kitchen on your side. People who order their meat well done perform a valuable service for those in the business who are cost-conscious. They pay for the privilege of eating our garbage. In many kitchens, there's a time-honored practice called save for well done. When one of the cooks finds a particularly unlovely piece of steak, tough, riddled with nerve and connective tissue, off the hip end of the loin, and maybe a little stinky from age, he'll dangle it in the air and say, "Hey, chef, what do you want me to do with this?" Now, the chef has 3 options. He can tell the cook to throw the offending item into the trash, but that means a total loss, and in the restaurant business, every item of cut, fabricated, or prepared food should earn at least 3 times the amount it originally cost if the chef is to make his correct food cost percentage. Or he can decide to serve that steak to the family, that is, the floor staff, though that economically is the same thing as throwing it out. But no, what he's going to do is repeat the mantra of cost-conscious chefs everywhere: save for well done. The way he figures it, the Philistine who orders his food well done is not likely to notice the difference between food and flotsam. I love the sheer weirdness of the kitchen life. The dreamers, the crackpots, the refugees, and the sociopaths with whom I continue to work. The ever-present smells of roasting bones, searing fish, and simmering liquids. The noise and clatter, the hiss and spray, the flames, the smoke, and the steam. Admittedly, it's a life that grinds you down. Most of us who live and operate in the culinary underworld are in some fundamental way dysfunctional. We've all chosen to turn our backs on the 9 to 5, on ever having a Friday or a Saturday night off, on ever having a normal relationship with a non-cook. Being a chef is a lot like being an air traffic controller. You're constantly dealing with the threat of disaster. You've got to be mom and dad, drill sergeant, detective, psychiatrist, and priest to a crew of opportunistic, mercenary hooligans whom you must protect from the nefarious and often foolish strategies of owners. Year after year, cooks contend with bouncing paychecks, irate purveyors, desperate owners looking for that masterstroke that will cure their restaurant's ills. Live cabaret, free shrimp, New Orleans brunch. In America, the professional kitchen is the last refuge of the misfit. It's a place for people with bad pasts to find a new family. It's a haven for foreigners, Ecuadorians, Mexicans, Chinese, Senegalese, Egyptians, Poles. In New York, the main linguistic spice is Spanish. Ay, maricón, chupa mis huevos, means roughly, how are you, valued comrade? I hope all is well. and you hear, "Ay, baboso, put some more brown jizz on the fire and check your mise before the Sioux comes back there and fucks you in the culo." Which means, please reduce some additional demi-glace, brother, and re-examine your mise en place, because the sous chef is concerned about your state of readiness. Since we work in close quarters and so many blunt and sharp objects are at hand, you'd think the cooks would kill one another with regularity. I've seen guys duking it out in the waiter station over who gets a table for 6. I've seen a chef clamp his teeth on a waiter's nose. And I've seen plates thrown. I've even thrown a few myself. But I've never heard of one cook jamming a boning knife into another cook's rib cage or braining him with a meat mallet. Line cooking, done well, is a dance, a high-speed, Balanchine collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Next, we have Patrick reading also from Kitchen Confidential. Yes, it does.
Hi. So this is an excerpt from Kitchen Confidential called Climb Out. It is one of the central ironies of my career that as soon as I got off heroin, things started getting really bad. High on dope, I was at least a chef, well paid, much liked by crew and floor and owners alike. Stabilized on methadone, I became nearly unemployable by polite society. A shiftless, untrustworthy coke sniffer, sneak thief, and corner-cutting hack, toiling in obscurity in the culinary backwaters. I worked mostly as a cook, moving from place to place, often working under an alias. For a time, I took another chef's job, of sorts, at a moment of need at Billy's, a combo sit-down/takeout upscale chicken joint on Bleecker Street. It was an operation that was to be the flagship of another planned empire, a chain of chicken joints that would stretch across the globe. At this low point in my career, I didn't care if the place succeeded or not. I needed the money. My boss was an older Jewish guy, fresh out of prison, who'd named the place after his youngest son, Billy, a feckless ne'er-do-well. He had been, in an earlier life, the head of the counting room at a Las Vegas casino. And after being caught skimming off millions for the boys back in New York and Cincinnati, he'd been offered a friendly deal should he cooperate with prosecutors. He had admirably declined, and as a result spent the last 5 years eating prison chow. When he got out, a near-broken man, his old buddies in New York, being men of honor, set him up with a restaurant and promises of more to come as a sign of gratitude for services rendered. Unfortunately, whilst in prison, the old man had completely lost his mind. He may have been a stand-up guy, but he was absolutely barking mad. This was not a classic bust-out operation where the mob deliberately runs a place into the ground, using a frontman, straw owner to run up bills, then pillage the place for merchandise and credit. I think that the wise guys, who from the early days of startups were always around, really wanted the poor slob to make money and be a success. They made earnest efforts to help at every turn, enduring much nonsense from their visibly deranged partner. It was, in retrospect, a useful experience for me, one I relied on for later works of fiction. I'd seen mobsters around before, of course, but I'd never worked in a place that was out and out mobbed up, where I came to know on a personal basis real wise guys whose names I recognized from the papers. Everyone was astonishingly upfront about their connections. My boss was fond of yelling into the phone when discussing prices with a purveyor. "You know who I am? You know who I'm with?" We did things differently at Billy's. My cooks, for one, every one of them came from the Fortune Society. Guys who spent their off hours in halfway houses, allowed out only to work. I was used to working with a fairly rough bunch, a lot of whom at one time or another had had problems with the law. But at Billy's, every single one of my cooks still basically was a convict. I can't say that it was an unhappy arrangement either. For once I knew my cooks were going to show up at work every day, because if they didn't, they went back to prison. My boss spent a lot of time on the phone investigating the serious business of horses and their bloodlines, and how well they ran in mud or on grass. So my day-to-day was spent mostly with some genial gentlemen from an Italian fraternal organization. They helpfully told me where to buy my meat and poultry and how to meet the folks who would be supplying my linen, bread, paper goods, and so on. I had a lot of meetings in cars. The bread guy is here, I'd be told, and a late model Buick would pull up out front. An old guy in a mashed down golf cap would beckon me from the driver's seat and then get out of the car. The older guy in the passenger seat would slide over, indicating he wanted me to get in, sit next to him, and talk. We'd sit there in the idling car, talking cryptically about bread, before he brought me around to the trunk to examine some product. It was a strange business. Yet some things were off limits. Trash removal, I found, was a mysteriously prearranged division of labor. When I called around for price quotes and told them for whom I was calling, I was repeatedly quoted prices far exceeding the national debt. Until I called the company I'd obviously been intended to do business with. "Oh, yeah, Billy's," said the voice on the phone. "I was waiting for yous to call," and quoted me a very reasonable price. I rang up a meat company, inquiring if they'd care to sell me tens of thousands of dollars of burger patties a year, and they gave me a flat no. They wouldn't even quote me prices. I was confused by this until years later when I read a Paul Castellano biography called Boss of Bosses and recognized the name of the meat company as a business operated by another family. And there was the chicken guy, who also met me in his car and showed me samples in a trunk. When I introduced him to my boss, the old man bitched about the price, telling the chicken guy in his blood-smeared white butcher's coat that the price was too high, that he could just fly to fucking Virginia, buy the product direct. And do you know who I'm with anyway? The chicken guy was not impressed. He spat on the floor, looked my boss in the eye and said, "Fuck you, asshole. You know who I'm with? You can fly to fucking Virginia and buy direct all you want. You still gonna pay me. Frank fucking Purdue pays me, asshole. And you're gonna pay me too." My boss was suitably chastened for a time, but he got wackier and wackier. When we finally opened, we were packed from the first minute. Orders flooded in over the phone and at the counters and at the tables. We were underprepared and understaffed. So the Italian contingent, including various visiting dignitaries, all with oddly anglicized names. "This is Mr. D, Tony, and meet a friend, Mr. Brown. This is Mr. Lang." All of them overweight, cigar-chomping middle-aged guys with bodyguards and $10,000 watches, pitched in to help out with deliveries and at the counter. Guys I'd read about later in the papers as running construction in the outer boroughs, purported killers, made men who lived in concrete piles on Staten Island and Long Beach and security-fenced estates in Jersey. These guys carried brown paper bags of chicken sandwiches up 3 flights of stairs to Greenwich Village walk-up apartments to make deliveries. They slathered mayo and avocado slices on pita bread behind the counter and bussed tables in the dining room. I have to say, I liked them for that. But when my boss inexplicably showed up one day and told me to fire everyone with a tattoo on my staff, I was faced with a dilemma. Every one of my cooks was festooned with prison tattoos. I tried to put him off, explaining that we couldn't do without these guys, that the hardest working, most indispensable guy we had, the guy who right now was loading trash cans with hundreds of marinating chicken parts in the cramped, stifling, unrefrigerated cellar on his 22nd consecutive double shift, was a goddamn Sistine Chapel of skin art. And where am I going to find a convict without a tattoo? The Watergate burglars weren't, to my knowledge, available. Things only got worse. He came in the next day obsessing about gold chains and jewelry. This was clearly impossible, and I sought counsel with one of the silent partners who, as my boss had become increasingly distracted and unpredictable, had grown noticeably less silent. "You hear what he wants me to do?" I asked. The man just nodded and rolled his eyes sympathetically, I thought. "Do nothing," he said, and then, with truly dangerous intonation, added, "Aspetta," meaning wait in Italian. I didn't like the sound of that at all. He smiled at me, and I couldn't help picturing my boss slumped over a dashboard after one of those meetings in a car they were all so fond of. When things came to a head a few days later, my boss openly screaming in the middle of a crowded dining room that he wanted all the tattooed guys and gold chain wearers out, now. I told him to pay me what he owed. I was leaving for good. He refused. The silent partner came over, peeled off my pay and an extra $100 from a fat roll in his suit pocket, and gave me a warm smile as he bade me goodbye. I don't know what happened to Billy's. It certainly never developed into a worldwide chain as my crazed boss had envisioned, or even a second store. The next time I was in the neighborhood, a picture framer occupied the space where the restaurant had been. What happened to the old man and his dreams of a poultry empire for his son? I can only guess.
Thank you, Patrick. And now we'll have Karen Rinaldi reading.
Hi, everybody. A continuation from Kim's reading. This is called The Fish on Monday Thing. And it comes from Tony's book, Medium Raw, and he wrote it, I think, 11 years after he wrote the warning about fish on Monday. I was genuinely angry most mornings writing Kitchen Confidential, an unfocused aim in a general direction and fire, kind of a rage, only exacerbated by the fact that my writing regimen, such as it was, consisted of a 5:30 or 6 a.m. wake-up call, a hurried disgorging of sentences, reminiscences, and hastily reconstructed memories from the previous night. This, after a 10 or 12 or 14-hour day in the kitchen, followed invariably by too much drink and a topple into bed. I'd spit whatever words I had quickly onto the page, no agonizing over sentences for me, there wasn't time anyway. Then off to work again, put on the sauces, cut the meat, portion the fish, crack the peppercorns, cook lunch, and so on. 3:30, 2 quick pints down the street, back to Leal, either work the line or read the board, then off to the Siberia bar. For those of you who remember Siberia bar, it was a pretty fucking fabulous place. Or simply sat down with the remains of the floor staff for just one more and get drunk en place. Sagged down in the back right passenger seat of a yellow Chevy Caprice, legs twisted uncomfortably behind the bulletproof partition. That's where I did my best work, thinking about what I was going to write the next day. Window half cracked, me halfway or fully in the bag. I'd think about my life as New York City rolled by outside. As I lived in Morningside Heights on the Upper West Side, by the time I got home, my taxi would have passed through a near comprehensive landscape of greatest hits, all my sorrows, all my joys, as I think the song goes. A densely packed checkerboard pattern of mistakes, failures, crimes, betrayals, large and small. The occasional happy spot with good associations would make me smile weakly before plunging me in the other direction as I'd recall how things got all fucked up, went wrong, or simply just came to this. I was always glad to see the spot on Broadway where my then wife and I had set up our books and records for sale, happy that I wasn't doing that anymore, that there were no longer a need for either of us to adhere to that kind of unrelentingly voracious math. But I was still angry, in the way I suspect that mobs get angry about all the things I didn't have, and I was sure I would never have. I never had health insurance, for one thing, nor had my wife, and that scared the hell out of me. as getting sick was, on one hand, just not an option, and on the other, increasingly likely as we grew older. A sudden pain in the jaw requiring a root canal would hit the financial picture, such as it was, like a freight train, total destruction. Car commercials made me angry, as I never owned a car or so much as a scooter, and I was quite sure by now never would. Home ownership was a concept so beyond imagining as to be laughable. I was so far behind on rent, so ridiculously in arrears on income taxes, that on the rare occasion when I went to bed sober, I'd lie there in terror, my heart pounding in my ears, trying desperately to not think the unthinkable. That at any time, either the landlord, government, or the long ignored but still very much still there folks from Amex could take everything away. That everything amounted only to somewhere between $14 and $400 on a good day was cold comfort. It was only a combination of rent-stabilized apartment, a Byzantine, slow-moving and tenant-friendly housing court, and a wife who could work the system that kept a roof over our heads. And that streak of improbable good luck, too, could run out at any minute. So I was afraid, very afraid. Every day and every night and every time I bothered to think about these things, which was a lot because that's the way a reasonable person with a job who doesn't have a drug habit was supposed to think about things, realistically. Frightened people become angry people, as history teaches us again and again. Facing reality after a lifetime of doing everything I could to escape it offered no rewards that I could see, only punishment. No solution presented itself. I couldn't go back. That way was blocked for sure, and I couldn't go forward. I'd quit heroin, I'd quit methadone, I'd stop doing cocaine and stop smoking crack, like everybody tells you to, right? And there I was, still broke, still frightened, and in a deep financial hole I knew I would never climb out of. And I was angry about that, very angry. 5 years earlier, after the kind of once-in-a-lifetime, freakishly lucky breaks that I have been all too common in my life, the kind of thing most aspiring writers only dream of, I'd published 2 separately unsuccessful novels that had disappeared without a trace, never making it into paperback. This, the general wisdom taught me, effectively finished me in publishing. And about this, maybe only this, I was actually not angry. It had been a nice ride, I'd felt, one on which I had embarked with 0 expectations. I'd kept my day job, never imagining I'd do otherwise. The whole enterprise had dropped in my lap, felt like a scam from the get-go, so I'd thankfully never suffered from any delusions of being a writer. 2 uninterrupted hours of sitting at an empty table in a Northridge, California Barnes & Noble on a one-stop crackpot and equally crack-brained self-finance book tour had quickly disabused me of such notions. When I sat down at my desk every morning to write Kitchen Confidential and began clacking away at the keyboard, I was both gloriously free of hope that it would ever be read outside of a small subculture of restaurant people in New York City, and boiling with the general ill will of the unsatisfied, the envious, the marginal. Let it be funny for cooks and waiters and fuck everybody else, was pretty much my thinking at the time. Which worked out okay in the end, as I could never have written the thing had I thought people would actually read it. So the result was an angry book in a lot of ways, and over time, that's what people have come to expect from me. I'm just a cranky old fuck with what I guess could charitably be called issues. And I'm still angry. But eat the fucking fish on Monday already, okay? I wrote those immortal words about not going for the Monday fish, the ones that'll haunt me long after I'm crumbs in a can, knowing nothing other than New York City. And times, to be fair, have changed. Okay, I would still advise against the fish special at TGI McSweeney's, a place for beer on a Monday. Fresh fish, I guess, is probably not the main thrust of their business. But things are different now for chefs and cooks. The odds are better than ever that the guy slinging fish and chips back there in the kitchen actually gives a shit about what he's doing. And even if he doesn't, These days, he has to figure that you might actually know the difference. Back when I wrote the book that changed my life, I was angriest, like a lot of chefs and cooks of my middling abilities, at my customers. They've changed. I've changed. About them, I'm not angry anymore.
Thank you, Karen. So now we're going to break it up a little bit and talk a little bit about Tony as writer, especially with some of the pieces that you just read in mind. So I want to start with a question that really anyone can field. Tony had this obvious love for the underworld, the underbelly of cooking, the sort of criminality of it, the cultish, slavish devotion to the kitchen. And I'm wondering, what was it about that feeling that he had? How did that influence him as a writer? How did that sort of, that underworld criminality, how did you see that come out on the page?
Is that me?
Anyone.
That's a good question, actually. I mean, I'll say something that is maybe too much, but I think Tony liked the idea of the bad boy, of being the bad boy. And Tony was actually a very loyal, kind person and kind of nerdy. And I always thought that this fascination with this gritty underbelly was kind of a shadow side of him as well, but a side that didn't exhibit itself very often. So I think he kind of worked it out on the page. That would be my assessment as an editor and as somebody who knew Tony. But I don't know if that rings true or not, Patrick.
I mean, it does to me. I don't. I think there's a few things in there, right? Like I think he loved kind of iconoclastic outlaw figures. He loved them in the culture. He loved them in books. He loved them in movies. I've always thought that he was kind of confecting his own persona from pretty early on. And like you look back, it's funny, people are probably familiar with the cover, the original cover of Kitchen Confidential. And there's a detail in that photo of him, like in his like neat chef's whites, kind of looking out at you, which is if you look down at the bottom of the photo, he's got in his like belt, he has these enormous like swords, basically. And in my piece, I said it's like the kind of thing you would use to like disembowel a gorgon, you know. And you almost don't see them in the bottom of the frame. And there were other pictures. There's the whole kind of tradition of like early photos of Tony like wielding large pieces of steel. So I think there was some of that, and I think that his persona as the kind of brash truth teller, the guy who's going to kind of tell it like it really is, I think that's a thread that runs through. But I guess the one other thing I would say is that I also think Tony had a thing about being part of a tribe. I think he loved the kind of solidarity and the kind of subculture of the kitchen, the codes of it. And I actually think that if you look at kind of different times in his life, like even later when he gets into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like I was like, what is it? What's the kind of affinity here? And it's the same thing. It's like a kind of underground cult of people. It's like Fight Club, right? It's like you sort of sign up and you become a member of this thing, and there's all these codes and customs, and at the beginning you're a newbie, and then you kind of get more experienced. And so I think that it was strangely that there's the kind of iconoclastic, like individualistic side of him, but then there's also this part of it where he wanted to like be a part of a thing and really get to know it.
I'm just going to add one thing quickly. So I've had the privilege of working with many, many bright people in my line of work. And Tony was one of the smartest people I ever worked with. And I think for him not to be playing with that narrative while he was moving through the world would have been just way too uncomplicated. So it was sort of that he was always looking for how to enhance the reality of life.
So this specifically for Karen and Kim, who worked so closely with Tony as a writer, When he wrote Kitchen Confidential, he was terrified of his debt, as we heard in Karen's reading. He was struggling financially, and he felt, quote, genuinely angry most mornings. He wrote this book without any expectation of success, and that it was really just aimed at making people laugh that he worked with. How critical do you think that combination of boiling, unfocused aim in a general direction and fire kind of rage, how critical was that to his being allowed to create this kind of trademark, unfiltered voice that he had? Was he actually fueled by rage?
If you get the Reader, you'll see there are many pieces in the Reader that are actually written long before Kitchen Confidential. I think the youngest, he's probably 10 or 12, the earliest piece. It's already there. So I think that's who he was.
So the voice was the voice. The voice was there from high school.
Yeah, Tony did not speak differently than he wrote, and he did not think differently than he spoke or he wrote. It was one continuum. And there's a piece, I think it's in the book, where he talks about how angry he was at his parents even, right? These people who were really basically very good to him. He admits it. He had a really wonderful childhood, and yet he was furious with them. So I think he just landed here like that.
And now a question for Patrick. From your profile in The New Yorker in 2017, you wrote, "When Bourdain tells his own story, he often makes it sound as if literary success were something that he stumbled into. In fact, he spent years trying to write his way out of a kitchen." And I was wondering if you could just say more about that, what you observed of Tony as a writer, and what you knew on the surface, or what he told you and what you discovered. I know you did some research at NYU and came across some evidence that maybe he had been paddling under the surface more than he cared to cop to.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. There's a story at The New Yorker, in kind of the oral tradition of The New Yorker, that goes back now several decades, about an editor. We have the slush pile where people send in these articles that they've written and they're hoping they'll be published in The New Yorker. At the time, it was a physical pile, right? And there's a story about the editor who plucked Kitchen Confidential out of the slush pile and discovered this diamond in a rough and published it and launched the career of Anthony Bourdain. Funny thing is, there are multiple editors who claim that they were the editor in this story, which from a kind of New Yorker fact-checking perspective, they couldn't all have been the one who made the discovery. And when I got into this story and I started writing this, I spent a year writing this profile of Tony, I learned that the truth was in some ways much more interesting. So he had written, there's a whole backstory involving you, but what ends up happening is that he has this piece, which is an excerpt from Kitchen Confidential, this sort of work in progress, effectively. And it was at the New York Press. Interestingly enough, Sam Sifton was the editor at the New York Press who was going to publish it at the New York Press. And this was Tony's, to hear him tell it, he would have been very satisfied to have it go in the New York Press. The New York Press, not Sam Sifton, but whoever his boss was at the time, spiked the piece, killed the piece, didn't want to run it. And then Tony, whose mother worked at the New York Times as a copy editor, got his mom to talk to Esther Fine, who was a New York Times journalist, who happened to be married to David Remnick, who was the new editor at the New Yorker. And so Tony's mom slipped Kitchen Confidential. This is a story that he was not wild about me getting into the details, but the idea of his mom, who you just mentioned he was so mad at, right? Played this kind of fairly instrumental role. I tell you this story because what was so striking to me is that he was always so kind of casual and self-deprecating about himself, and I think he had a kind of weird relationship with ambition where he's sort of confessing to it, but he also hates that he has the ambition. And what I found when I delved into this is that it went a long way back, right? So this is the late 1990s we're talking about now. And 1985, Tony signs up for a writing class at Columbia with Gordon Lish, who was this kind of famous editor, magazine editor at the time. And he starts pitching Between C and D, which is a literary magazine, now defunct, but was at the time this like Lower East Side literary magazine. And I went down to NYU, and in the archives at NYU of Between C and D, you can find Tony's old pitches, where he was sending in these pitches and these stories. He would draw these little cartoons. And there's a kind of an incredible, like a very affecting earnestness where he so badly wants to be published. And initially, he's actually getting rejected, but he kind of gamely keeps going. And so that was the thing that I found, was just that I think there is this sense of the stories that he was this guy who was a chef who then just kind of happened to scribble together this book, and then it becomes this huge phenomenon. And in a weird way, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but like his television career kind of was like that. The television career did sort of happen somewhat accidentally. It kind of came along and fell in his lap. But the writing thing, I think he kind of sells himself short. Like he spent, the better part of 15 years willing that career into life.
One thing he said to me about TV, television, when I guess we were between Kitchen Confidential and A Cook's Tour, and he said, "Shoot me if I ever start doing TV." I mean, and he used to say that all the time. I mean, do you remember that? I was like, Tony, what do we do now?
Okay, so one more question, and this is for Kim in particular. You were the shepherd of Tony's writing career for the last 2 decades. You were the one who made sure that his crime novels went into paperback, and you obviously edited the Anthony Bourdain Reader that we're here to talk about tonight. And I wanted to know, what did you see in him as a writer that made you want to take him on as a client? You told me a story for the biography that there wasn't a lot, you didn't have a lot of leverage for him as a client, and he had these 2 novels that didn't really sell very well. So there was something that you saw in him that made you want to take a chance on him, and what was that? And how did he evolve as a writer? Sorry, 2-part question.
Well, I think that although those 2 books never even got paperback, they were both New York Times notable selections. And I really was looking at him as a fiction writer. That's all I had. And it was true that our first meeting happened in the lobby of the old Random House building on East 50th Street. We met there, he was early, went upstairs, and basically he glowered at the publisher while I explained that he needed to give those books back to us because he'd refused to paperback them. And we didn't have e-books back then. The fact that he had this juggernaut of a nonfiction career was honestly a huge surprise. That's not what we were thinking. He was going to write another novel, and we were going to have the rights back on the first 2 novels, and I was going to somehow relaunch him with that. And in terms of how his writing evolved, I don't know that it did. I mean, again, you can see it across the reader. I can't even make the argument that the later pieces are significantly more polished or significantly more accomplished than what he wrote right out of the gate. He was always disciplined. I think that's probably another reason that I was attracted to him and was willing to take him on. It was just very obvious that this guy was going to work very, very hard and do everything he could do to make it work out. And he never lost that. He never missed a deadline the entire time we worked together. I don't think I ever had to ask for an extension, which as an agent is very unusual. And he took huge pleasure in still getting up 5:30 in the morning and carving out that writing time, even when it didn't have to happen that way. That is still the way he wrote. So that's my take.
All right, thank you. So we're going to have another set of readings now, starting with Ruth Reichl reading 2 pieces from Tony, that one short and one a little bit longer.
So this is a really lovely piece that's a little different than everything else that's been read. It's called How Anthony Bourdain Came to Be Anthony Bourdain, that originally appeared on Father's Day in 2012. I was shucking oysters at a raw bar in the village when my father died. He was 57 years old. I think about that a lot, and about my father, whose face I see in my own more and more with the passing of the years. There's a picture of me with my then 4.5-year-old daughter that was taken at a food festival in the Caymans. She's sitting on my lap, eyes closed. I'm holding her tight, my face sunburned and blissed out with the joys of fatherhood. I've never looked more like him. My father was, as he liked to say, a man of simple needs. He grew up with a French mother, a French name, speaking French, and spent many summers in France. But this history wasn't really a factor in my childhood. It always came as a shock to me when he'd break into French with a Haitian cab driver, as there was, seemingly, nothing French about him, or us, or how we lived. He liked wine, on the rare occasions when some came our way, making pronouncements like, all wine is red, but couldn't have cared less whether it was a Chateau de something or a Vin de Table, as long as it was from Bordeaux, near where his family came from. To him, all food was either marvelous or not worth mentioning. A decent steak frite at a crummy brasserie was as good as a fine dining meal. During my early vacations in France, our family's crummy brasserie of choice was the unpromising sounding Quick Élysée, where a thin slice of humble rump steak with curiously blonde frites soon became a treasured taste memory. In his view, France and New Jersey, where we lived, were the same. He seemed equally attached romantically. France had runny, pungent cheeses and sausage that were marvelous. But the Jersey Shore, where we were more likely to vacation, had steamer clams, not to mention the occasional lobster with drawn butter. He taught me early that the value of a dish is the pleasure it brings you, where you are sitting when you eat it, and who you are eating it with are what really matter. Perhaps the most important life lesson he passed on was this: don't be a snob. It's something I will always at least aspire to, something that has allowed me to travel this world and eat all it has to offer without fear or prejudice. To experience joy, my father taught me, one has to leave oneself open to it. The world, in his view, was filled with marvels. George C. Scott's manic eyebrows in Dr. Strangelove were deemed marvelous. But then so, potentially, was any food that was new. Wherever you were, he taught me, was an opportunity to eat something interesting. Growing up in New Jersey, American food was Italian, Chinese, Jewish, diner. It took a trip across the bridge to be able to delve into the exotic worlds of smorgasbord, sukiyaki, German, and old-school bistro French. Chinese food was deemed worth investigating as a family, and investigate we did, venturing frequently into Manhattan on weekends for fabulously gluey and bright-colored Cantonese on Upper Broadway and in Chinatown. Visits to my father's office in Manhattan would yield trips to Wienerwald for foreign sausages steamed with sauerkraut, salty pretzels, and charred roast chestnuts from street carts. The mysterious joys of the dirty water hot dog. He was delighted by different, thrilled by discovery. In the early 70s, he discovered sushi because it was being served in the signless, somewhat sinister back room of a rundown hotel on 55th Street that some Japanese colleagues had tipped him off to. when he walked me, 14 years old, through the shabby hotel lobby for the first time, opened an unmarked door, and ushered me into a smoky room crowded with Japanese people eating raw fish. He was bubbling over with childlike glee. He was generally a pretty serious man, prone to escaping into books and music. A moody one, too, I suspected. But with us, he was almost always goofy and without vanity. When he said, "I am a man of simple needs," it was an expression of genuine satisfaction with the moment. It left an impression. I remember those words every time I find myself made ridiculously happy by a bowl of noodles eaten while sitting on a low plastic stool, sucking up the smell of burning josh sticks and distant wafts of durian, the sight of Vietnamese families on their motorbikes all around me. And then there's this, the purpose of the hamburger bun. This is an excerpt from Tony's last cookbook, Appetites. Brioche are very nice for breakfast. Do not think for 1 second that a brioche roll is a good idea for a hamburger. The brioche is a French innovation. The French, however vital to all things culinary, have no cultural understanding of or historic sympathies for the American hamburger. The purpose of the hamburger bun is to support and enhance the meat. Hamburger meat is, by definition, supposed to be fatty. A certain amount of grease is desirable. The bun is supposed to counteract the runoff and absorb it. It is supposed to last in direct proportion to the amount of meat left until the last bite. Brioche are greasy. They add grease. They also crumble and break apart in the hand as the burger reaches its butt end. It is not a reliable partner or friend. The potato bun, however, is the perfect delivery system for a fatty patty. It should be soft, pillowy, reliable, and decidedly proletarian. Like sushi, another perfect food, a hamburger should be austere, seemingly uncomplicated, yet prepared with pride and precision. One must continue to ask oneself, as if arranging flowers in the Japanese manner, is this necessary? Stripping away that which does not serve the meat. The meat is the star. Does one need a tomato slice? Does it really add anything? Here, a cost-benefit analysis is required. The tomato may be in season at its height of deliciousness, but will including it in the deliciously constructed hamburger be worth the possible damage to its structure and eatability? Cheddar or processed American food? One must ask oneself constantly what one is willing to sacrifice for presumed quality. American cheese clearly is texturally and structurally superior as a binding agent and has added force of tradition on its side. Lettuce, I'm not a fan. I'll have my salad on the side. But I understand the desire for crunch. If you're putting mesclun or baby arugula on your burger, though, Guantanamo Bay would not be an unreasonable punishment. Use finely shredded iceberg or maybe romaine, period. Onions add something to the party, but they must be thinly sliced, paper thin, and fresh, please. Caramelized? No, not a fan. Burgers should not be sweet. Any sweetness in a burger should come from the ketchup alone. Speaking of which, do not put house-made chutney on my hamburger. Please. Let ketchup do its job. And don't make house-made ketchup either. Why would you do that? If it's not broken, as they say, why the fuck would you fix it? Is your ketchup really better than the stuff that's been our trusty condiment companion for decades? A waiter asked me if I'd like some house-made ketchup, and I tense up, anticipating further blows. Will Mumford & Son suddenly emerge from the kitchen and begin playing tableside? Mayonnaise? Maybe, if judiciously applied. You don't want that burger shooting out from between the buns and landing on your genitals. It's a tough call. How much do you really like mayonnaise? A cost-benefit analysis is called for here. Bacon, by all means. But as with anything you put on a burger, serious attention must be paid to thickness, doneness, and cut, which is to say, use a standard issue thin slice of bacon and cook it to well done. And don't overload your burger with it. You can, as it turns out, have too much bacon.
Thank you, Ruth. And I'd like to invite Patrick back to the podium to read a second piece by Tony.
Okay, this is actually going to be two short pieces, but both sort of on the same theme, which is Vietnam. The first one is called I Was Hooked, and it's an excerpt from the foreword that Tony wrote for Graham Holliday's Eating Vietnam, Dispatches from a Blue Plastic Table. Vietnam owns me. From my first visit, I was helpless to resist. Just a few months previous, I'd been resigned to the certainty that I would never see Vietnam, that my dreams of Graham Greene land, that faraway place I only knew from childhood news reports, books, and films, would have to wait for another life. This life, I was sure, would finish in close proximity to a Manhattan deep fryer. So simply finding myself there, finally, outside the legendary Continental Hotel in Saigon, smelling Vietnam, hearing it, the high roar of thousands of motorbikes, I was overcome with gratitude and disbelief. Jet-lagged, back when I still got jet lag, and deranged by anti-malarial meds, I staggered happily through the heat to the places I'd read about in the great nonfiction accounts of the French and American wartime years. The Majestic, the rooftop at the Rex, and of course, the very hotel where I was staying. I ate steaming, spicy bowls of pho on the street and crispy fried quails, and was delightfully overwhelmed by the smells and flavors of Bain Tan Market. I ventured out into the Mekong Delta, where I got savagely drunk with an extended family of former Viet Cong. I explored the islands and floating markets off Nha Trang, had many adventures, and made lasting friends. And I changed. My attitude changed, of course. Your eyes can't help but open when you travel and just see the places I'd read so much about. And just to see the places I'd read so much about was surely life-changing. But something else changed on an almost cellular level, as if my very tissues had been penetrated by the smells and atmosphere of Vietnam, that heavy air, thick with odors of jackfruit, durian, fresh flowers, raw chicken, diesel fuel, incense. Vietnam is a country of proud cooks and passionate eaters. And after experiencing the spicy morning soups of Saigon, the notion of ever settling for a bland Western-style breakfast again was unthinkable. I was hooked. I wanted more. I needed more. I left Vietnam that first time determined to do whatever was necessary to keep coming back, even if that involved something as undistinguished as making television. And this is Hanoi, an excerpt from Medium Raw. The only way to see Hanoi is from the back of a scooter. To ride in a car would be madness, limiting your mobility to a crawl, preventing you from even venturing down half the narrow streets and alleys where the good stuff is to be found. To be separated from what's around you by a pane of glass would be to miss everything. Here, the joy of riding on the back of a scooter or motorbike is to be a part of the throng, just one more tiny element in an organic thing, a constantly moving, ever-changing process, rushing, mixing, swirling, and diverting through the city's veins, arteries and capillaries. Admittedly, it is also slightly dangerous. Traffic lights, one-way signs, intersections, and the like, the rough outlines of organized society, are more suggestions than regulations observed by anyone in actual practice. One has, though, the advantage of the right-of-way. Here, the scooter and the motorbike are kings. The automobile may rule thoroughfares in America, but in Hanoi, it's cumbersome and unwieldy, the last one to the party, a woolly mammoth of the road, to be waited on, begrudgingly accommodated, even pitied, like the fat man at a sack race. Lynn is driving. I should just interject and say, when Tony first went to Vietnam in 2000, he had this government minder, Lynn, and they developed this incredible friendship and stayed friends through to the end of Tony's life. Lynn is driving, and I've finally, after many hours and many times as his passenger, given up on the strictly Western practice of hanging on. Nobody else does. Not the 3-year-old child whipping past me, standing in front of his mother and father. Not grandma riding side saddle behind her son-in-law and daughter over there, or the hundreds of thousands of young men and women chatting on cell phones or exchanging comments from the backs of other bikes. Somehow we all manage to stay aboard without gripping our drivers around the waist or shoulders, or even bracing ourselves from the back. Somehow it all works. We manage to move quickly, sometimes very quickly, through space, together and apart, without flying from our seats or colliding with each other. Thousands, millions of us, a moving conversation of words, glances, gestures, and the shrill honks of our horns, with an ever-changing cast of characters snaking through Hanoi's old quarter, around its lakes, weaving through cross-currents, breaking over and around the bigger, sadder four-wheel vehicles like stones in a river, barely noticing the souls trapped glumly and impatiently inside. Is anyone in this city over 30? It seems not. Statistically, it is said that nearly 70% of the population are under that age, and if the streets of Hanoi, or any city in Vietnam for that matter, are any indicator, that number seems even higher. Nobody among them remembers the war. They weren't even alive for it. Much like our post-World War II baby boom, they must have gone straight home from the battlefield and done an awful lot of fucking around here. Everyone, it seems, is young and either on the way to eat, returning from eating, or eating at this very minute, absolutely choking the sidewalks on low plastic stools, filling the open-to-the-street shop houses, slurping noodles or nibbling on delicious-looking bits, drinking bia hoi, the fresh beer of Hanoi, with varying degrees of joy and seriousness of intent. My old favorite, bun cha, juicy hunks of pork served in room temperature sweet and sour green papaya juice, are grilling over charcoal by the curb. Bowls of bun ba, the bright, reddish, steaming mix of snails, noodles, and crab roe, infused broth, are recognizable from the hunks of fresh tomato on top as I sweep by. Sizzling crepes, banh mi sandwiches, crunchy baguettes overloaded with head cheese, delightfully mysterious pâté, pickles, and often a fried egg. Bun ba hui, a sort of heartier, more highly testosterone version of pho, noodles heaped with slices of beef and pork, slabs of blood cake, and nearly every delicious goddamn thing you can think of. Tiny electric red slices of chili pepper, crunchy sprouts, Thai basil, roughly yanked cilantro, mint, green banana slices, wedges of lime everywhere, everywhere. Some things never get old. Some things are just classic. You never lose appreciation for them. Your enthusiasm might wax and wane ever so slightly, but you always come back. Whether it's the Rolling Stones' Let It Bleed or doing it doggy style, good is simply good. It goes on. There may be, am I blushing? There may be other things in life, but you can pretty much spend eternity considering the matter of the former or the latter, and you'd be hard-pressed to improve on either of them. I feel exactly like this with Hanoi-style pho. I may love the southern versions of this spicy noodle soup fiercely and appreciate, even need from time to time, the difference, the rougher, spicier, less subtle charms of Saigon's often cloudier, more assertive sisters. But I wouldn't marry any of them. Using sexual metaphors to describe food is practiced blithely, even automatically employed by food writers, yours truly being a frequent perpetrator. But it seems particularly appropriate when describing pho in Hanoi, even though it's usually a morning routine as opposed to a late-night post-bar, fall into sloppy embrace kind of thing. Visiting a popular pho shop, particularly late in the morning, after the first waves of hungry people on their way to work have been through, resembles nothing so much as the set of a porn shoot. Here, as there, the landscape of desire is strewn with crumpled tissues, the spent expressions of human lust. Short pink plastic trash baskets overflow with little white paper balls. Wet tumbleweeds are littered everywhere. Walk 3 feet up to the counter, and they will cling embarrassingly to the soles of your feet, trail back to your table as if you are hurriedly exiting a peep show booth. Unlike with sex, however, this walk of shame comes before touchdown. For one's efforts, after a long wait online, the handover of a few dong, the unfortunate name for Vietnam's unit of currency, a jostle, and a squeeze in between strangers at a low table on a sidewalk, one is rewarded with perfection. This is a sophisticated and deceptively subtle thing, Hanoi pho. I do not pretend to fully understand and appreciate its timeless beauty. Here, describing pho as more like love than sex would be more accurate, as there is simply not enough time on this planet, I think, to ever truly know it. It is an unconditional kind of love, in that it doesn't matter where you enjoy it, elevated only a few feet off a dirty street corner or at the sleekly designed counter of an over-decorated lounge. It contains, like the man said, multitudes. Sometimes I think I should feel a little guilty about writing stuff like the above. It's porn, albeit food and travel porn. I had it, I lived it, and chances are most of the people reading this have not. It seems ungracious to share some experiences. Though I'm sure it's difficult to accept, my parents brought me up to believe that showing off was a bad thing, a sign of generally bad manners. I'm not saying those values took hold, just that I may have heard them mentioned. Some things I've seen, some experiences at tables and counters around the world, I feel a little bad telling people about. I may not hesitate to put them on TV at every opportunity, but that's different somehow, in that it's somebody else, the evil camera people, the editors doing the telling. This conveniently lets me off the hook. But writing about sights and sounds and flavors that might otherwise be described as orgiastic, and doing it in a way that is calculated to inspire prurient interest, lust, and envy in others, that raises more questions in my mind as to, the moral dimension. Sitting here, choosing my words letter by letter on the keyboard with the explicit intention of telling you about something I did or something I ate and making you as hungry and as miserable as I can. Surely that's wrong. But fuck it. Who doesn't like a good wank now and then?
Thank you, Patrick. And for the final reading, I'd like to invite Gabrielle Hamilton to the podium.
This is an excerpt from Chef's Night Out, originally published in Rover's Return, published by Rebel Incorporated in 1998. My early decision to become a serious, school-trained, European-style chef came after one particularly painful humiliation. 1973, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I'd been working a summer job as a dishwasher, my first restaurant. Elbow deep in a sink full of dirty pots and pans, I'd look back over the line at line cooks and envy them, swaggering, prideful young princes with a what-the-fuck attitude. They ate whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it. They drank everything in sight, free of charge, fucked all the good-looking waitresses, stayed up all night shooting craps, playing poker, snorting coke, and getting involved in varied and occasionally freakish sexual adventures. They smoked expensive, seedless weed, filled their refrigerators at will with stolen sirloins, lobsters, boxes of shrimp, and champagne. They carried big, badass, razor-sharp knives, which I thought was very cool, in leather roll-up cases, which they slung over their shoulders like disgraced samurai, and they dressed in the height of outlaw style, artfully ripped jeans, faded Viet Vet-type headbands, vaguely martial-looking double-breasted chef coats casually spattered with gore. They were cool. So the first time one of them went off on a bender and didn't return, I stepped in, volunteered to work what was called the berry station, or garde-manger. I happily cracked oysters on the half, made salads, plated desserts, filled champagne glasses with raspberries and strawberries. I bearded mussels, picked spinach, peeled potatoes and garlic and onions, and did the scut work for the big boys, the guys who cooked the hot food. When the summer came to an end, when the regular crew began to fade away, off to work ski resorts in Colorado, charter boats in the Caribbean, restaurants in the Florida Keys, I got my chance and moved up for the last few weeks before closing for the season. I worked the fry station, dunking clams, shrimp, flounder, scallops, and French fries into hot grease for a while, until the broiler man got pinched for a parole violation and my moment arrived. I was given charge of the broiler. The sheer pleasure, the power of commanding that monstrous, heavy iron and steel furnace, bumping the rolling grill under the flames with my hip the way I'd seen others do, it was delicious. I couldn't have been any happier in the cockpit of an F-16. I felt like I could rule the world. The next summer, my restaurant was bought by the owner of the better, larger, and busier restaurant across the street. Ciro, the new owner, was kind enough to allow those of us who'd worked the old place under its previous administration to audition for our old jobs. I was thrilled and headed up to the Cape from New York filled with hope and self-confidence, looking for that big-time broiler job, the big money, the position that would make me the studliest, ass-kicking, name-taking, take-no-prisoners motherfucker on Cape Cod. I pulled into town, I remember, wearing a spanking new Pierre Cardin seersucker suit, color light blue. I cringe now remembering it. The shoes, too, were blue. Here I was hitchhiking into a town that, for all intents and purposes, was a little artist's colony, a Portuguese fishing village, where people dressed unpretentiously in work clothes, cut-off denims, army surplus. And here I was, in some deranged early 70s bout of disco-inspired hubris, decked out in my bat-wing-shouldered Robert Palmer wear, come up from the city to show the local yokels how we did it in the big city. I was so full of myself, I could puke. My audition took place across the street at the usually jam-packed Ciro's. My last crew had been adorable amateurs. These guys were pros, and they knew it. Everybody knew it. The floor staff, the management, even Ciro, the owner, visibly cowered when in their presence. Only I was too stupid to see how over my head I was. Friday, an hour before service, and I was informed I'd be working with Tyrone, the broiler man. Looking back, I can't remember Tyrone as being anything less than 8 feet tall, 400 pounds of carved obsidian, with a shaved head and a prominent silver-capped front tooth and a gold hoop earring the size of a door knocker. A titan. Unintimidated as only the ignorant could be, I started shooting my mouth off right away, yapping about my old restaurant, what king-hell bad boys we all were back in the old days, regaling my new comrades with humorous anecdotes of New York City designed to shock and titillate, generally portraying myself as a street-smart, experienced, thoroughly professional gun for hire. I should have seen the practiced choreography of their movements for what it was, understood the level of professionalism and experience that allowed these hulking giants to dance wordlessly around each other in the cramped, heavily manned kitchen, never wasting movement, turning from stovetop to refrigerator to cutting board with breathtaking economy of effort. I should have understood the terror in the eyes of the floor staff as we got closer and closer to service period, seen the way these cooks spoke to each other, the end result of years working together in a confined space. They hefted 300-pound stock pots onto ranges, tossed legs of veal around like pullets, all the while indulgently enduring my endless, self-aggrandizing line of chatter without comment. An hour later, the board was filled with more dinner orders than I'd seen in a lifetime. Tables of 10, tables of 6, deuces, 3 tops, 12s, more and more and more of them. Waiters screaming, ordering, food going out, more orders coming in, the squawk of an intercom calling for food for an upstairs bar. Flames leapt out of pans 3 feet high. The broiler was crammed with rows and rows of steaks and veal chops, fish fillets and lobsters. Pasta was blanched and shocked and transferred in huge batches into colanders, falling everywhere. The floor, ankle deep in linguine, garganelli, tagliarini, spaghetti alla chitarra, penne, and the heat was horrific. I struggled and sweated and spun around like a headless chicken, hurried to keep up the best I could. Tyrone slinging sizzle platters under the broiler and me ostensibly helping out, getting deeper and deeper into the weeds. Then, grabbing a sauté pan, I burned myself. I yelped out loud, dropped the pan, an order of ossobuco milanese hitting the floor, and as a small red blister raised on my palm, I foolishly, oh so foolishly, asked the beleaguered Tyrone if he had some burn cream and maybe a Band-Aid. Forgive me. This was quite enough for Tyrone. It went suddenly quiet in the kitchen. Orders, it seemed as if by magic, ceased to come in or go out for a long, horrible moment. Tyrone turned to me, looked down, smiling now, and said, "What you want, white boy? Burn cream? A Band-Aid?" Then he raised his own enormous palms to me, brought them up close so I could see them properly, so I could see the hideous constellation of water-filled blisters, angry red welts, from grill marks, the old scars, the raw flesh where steam and hot fat had made the skin simply roll off. They looked like the claws of some monstrous sci-fi crustacean, knobby and calloused under wounds old and new. I watched transfixed as Tyrone, his shark's eyes never leaving mine, reached slowly under the roaring flames of the broiler and with one naked hand picked up a glowing hot sizzle platter, moved it over to the cutting board, and set it down in front of me. He never flinched. The other cooks cheered, laughed their asses off. Orders began to come in again, and everybody went back to work. I had been shown up for the loud-mouthed, useless little punk I was, identified as a pretender, and an obnoxious one at that, humiliated. Ciro ended up kicking me down to prep crew at my old restaurant, one step above dishwasher on the food chain, and I slunk home that night in my Pierre Cardin, hoping I'd die in my sleep. After a day or two of sulking and self-pity, I resolved, out of sheer spite, to become a chef.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, everyone. So we'll just do a little bit more discussion before we wrap it up this evening. This is really for any of us here. We're all writers, and we're all familiar with Tony's work. As we heard Patrick read so beautifully and with blushingly, Tony liked to sort of write in the style of food porn. Not exclusively, but he was very free with his sexual metaphors and thought it was important to calculate his writing to inspire the prurient interest, lust, and envy in others. I've heard a lot of different things be called the Bourdain effect, and I think one of the Bourdain effects, well, let me ask you, do any of you think that there is a Bourdain effect on food writing, American food writing, and did he start a kind of hyperbolic trend in food writing that maybe stemmed from Kitchen Confidential or his earlier work?
I think if he hadn't, somebody else would have. I mean, it was just, it was about to happen. I mean, food writing was sort of being taken over by a new generation of people who wrote very differently than previous generations had written. And I mean, he was probably the first. I mean, he was, I actually used to give a speech where I would sort of compare the way Gabrielle wrote about being, I actually think, Gabrielle, your piece about being on the line Sunday morning at Prune is one of the most extraordinary pieces of writing about what it's like to be in a kitchen, and very comparable to this, but it's a different voice. But I think that one, we became more interested in what happened in the kitchen. And so you did have chefs starting to write, and you also had, chefs were a different generation. I mean, when I first started writing about food, chefs weren't college educated. I mean, they were blue collar workers who, most of them were old European guys who started working at 12 or 13 in kitchens, and suddenly you had these very well-educated Americans writing, and I think Tony was the first of them, but I think it was inevitable that there would be more of them.
Question for Gabrielle, based on the piece that you just read. The Tony, as he described himself in 1973, floundering in his Pierre Cardin suit, was a self-aggrandizing, undereducated, full of himself, very different from the sort of very self-effacing person that I think all of us knew to some extent. That Tony was one of the first to sort of talk down his own writing, his own culinary career. And he was very quick to say that one of the least interesting things he could think of to do would be to hang out with a bunch of other writers. He would say, I would rather do anything than sit around and talk about writing with writers. And I'm wondering, because your career has a lot of similarities, both as accomplished writer and accomplished chef, what did the two of you talk about? Did you ever talk about writing? Did you talk about cooking? Or what was it like to hang out with him?
So I'll be the one that brings this conversation right down into the low. I think our first conversation, frankly, was long and great at Siberia Bar, and it was about how many women were throwing themselves at Rocco DiSpirito, who was sitting on a couch next to us at the beginning of Celebrity Chef was just emerging. And it was very early, I think, in all of our time. He was not yet Tony in the way he was still a cook, so was I completely. And I think we shared a lot of stupid line cook jokes. We played a lot of games, a lot of would you rather. And he loved The Last Supper, that one. But we also sort of did this cook thing where I would name other chefs, and it was sort of like throwing your gang signal, like if you like Fergus Henderson in London, which is like sort of admitting that you're like you were in this sort of insiderness. So that is what we started out as. And for me, I must say, talking to Tony about writing had a few parallels, perhaps even what you're saying now. One of them, for me, being very prominent, is that when it started to be known that I was going to write a book, everyone would say, "Are you going to be the female Anthony Bourdain? Are you trying to be the female Anthony Bourdain?" And, writers, as we all know, when you study all your craft and all the possible forms, et cetera, of voice, but what you really need to have is a voice. And I felt so like I do not want to be any other voice than my own. So I didn't want to talk to him about writing. And his advice frequently for me was perilous in a way, because he just said the same thing all the time. I get up, I write myself into a corner, and the next day I write myself out. And I don't know, it sounded so confident at the time, and I also thought it was so dude. I was like, well, who's making lunch for the goddamn children and getting them to school in the morning? Because I can't do that. So I had to sort of not talking to him about writing very much.
But also, I would say, I don't know many writers who sit around talking about writing with each other. Food people love to talk about food, right? And that happens, right? But writers, I can't ever remember being with friends who are writers and talking about writing.
Yeah, that's funny too, because I was thinking,
that makes one of us.
Right?
I was surprised to hear that he said I would rather do anything or be boiled in oil than hang out with writers, because I've said that a lot all the time about hanging out with chefs. Because it's like, oh, really? What do you do with the sardine? Well, what I like to do with the sardine is this. And I'm like, oh, I want to sit with a room full of dentists than this.
Well, I think, too, there was this idea for him that cooking was the real work, right? Cooking, how you could prove yourself to be a very stand-up, solid person was to cook a brunch shift, right? 300 brunches and none of them sent back, versus, oh, you sat around and wrote some sentences. And I don't know that that's entirely fair, but I think that was his, a little bit of a, not shame is too strong a word, but sort of chagrin at having made it as a writer after having worked honest work for 28 years. And I think, Patrick, that was part of your reporting in your feature, right?
Yeah, I don't know to what extent I fully believed that, but it was a line that he used, almost exactly that line about the brunches, and like, that's real work, there's real honor in that. And I don't know. I think that, but to me, this is all about his persona, and I think he was always underselling the work that he did with the writing. It is different in the sense that it's not as physically demanding. You're not going to get burned. I think of my own children who will say to me at the end of the day, "What did you do all day? You were just on your computer all day." It's a little bit of that, right? Like, there's no getting around the fact that it's like a pretty sedentary, solitary job. It may not look like work from the outside, so I think there was maybe some of that for him as well.
Well, we've heard these great writers reading Tony's work, and I think that the best way to wrap up the evening would be for us to listen to Tony himself reading from Medium Raw. This is a piece called "It Tastes Like Victory."
When people ask me if I ever miss it, my answer is always the same. No, I don't. I know. People want me to say yes. Yes, of course I miss it. But I had enough. I had 28 years of it, I tell them. 28 years. I was 44 years old when Kitchen Confidential hit. And if there was ever a lucky break or better timing, I don't know about it. At 44, I was, as all cooks too long on the line must be, already in decline. You're not getting any faster or smarter as a cook after age 37. The knees and back go first, of course, that you'd expect. But the hand-eye coordination starts to break up a little as well, and the vision thing. But it's the brain that sends you the most worrying indications of decay. After all those years of intense focus, multitasking, high stress, late nights, and alcohol, the brain stops responding the way you like. You miss things. You aren't as quick reading the board, prioritizing the dupes, grasping at a glance what food goes where, adding up totals of steaks on hold and steaks on the fire, and cumulative donenesses. Your hangovers are more crippling and last longer. Your temper becomes shorter, and you become more easily frustrated with yourself for fucking up little things, though less so with others. Despair, always a sometime thing in the bipolar world of the kitchen, becomes more frequent and longer lasting as one grows more philosophical with age and has more to despair about. You're basically done, or on your way to being done. Your brain knows it, your body knows it, and tells you every day. But pride persists. What I do miss, I tell them, and will always miss, is that first pull on a cold beer after work. That is irreplaceable. Nothing approaches that. That's the kind of satisfaction no bestseller can ever beat. No television show, no crowd, no nothing. That single moment after a long and very busy night, sitting down at the bar with your colleagues, wiping the sweat off your neck, taking a deep breath with unspoken congratulations all around, and then that first sip of cold, cold beer. It tastes like victory. Happy waiters, flush with tips, are ringing out. The cooks look pleased with you and with each other, and you remind yourself that nothing came back the whole night.
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And thank you to all the readers.